Welcome to The Talking Beat, the podcast for the Portland Police Bureau. We are focusing on thoughtful conversations that we hope will inform and provide you with a small glimpse of work performed by Portland Police Bureau members and our partners, as well as issues affecting public safety in our city.
I mean, the ultimate goal in this is to allow people to exercise their freedoms and their rights, to be able to do it without intervention of the police. But when we do have to intervene, the focus and the goal of that is to remove those problems so that people can then continue on and participate in their event without any interference or interactions with the police that are unnecessary.
Thanks for joining us today, and I want to thank our guests for joining me as well. We're talking about public order, and that's something that affects all of us and our First Amendment rights. Every year in Portland, there's hundreds of events where people go out, they demonstrate, they protest, they exercise their First Amendment rights, and police are not involved at all. And then there are events that require police attention if there's illegal activity. And that's what we're focused on today. I have two guests with me today from our command team, both experts in the field, Craig Dobson and Franz Schoening. And I've worked with both of you, and what I've learned from you is that public order is really a science, and there's extensive planning and coordination that goes into these public order events. So I'm going to start with you, Craig, and I want you to kind of talk about your experience and how you gained the knowledge throughout your tenure here at the Portland Police Bureau.
I was hired in July of 1998. In 2000, I had the opportunity to join the newly formed Rapid Response Team, which I took interest in after doing a couple of different public events. I was on the team for approximately 15 years. During that time, I also promoted to sergeant. While I was a sergeant, I was able to attend multiple classes on public order and how to manage those. I began taking courses on incident command, or ICS. I took additional command courses on how to manage public order events. As a sergeant, I became the special events sergeant, where I managed presidential visits during that time, as well as large-scale events. In 2010, when I became that sergeant, I recognized that there wasn't a lot of information that I could find to help us be better. And so I started looking. I came across some academic work, which suddenly opened the door to, oh my goodness, there's evidence-based policing opportunities for us to learn from. And that's what started us down this road of seeking out other people and other learning to be able to find better processes for us to be able to deal with public order. And I work really close with Franz. And so, Franz, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Craig. So I've been in the Bureau since 2002. I joined the Rapid Response Team in 2008 as a sergeant. That was really the first time I really dove into it. I really enjoyed it, getting out there and being out there with community members who are expressing their First Amendment rights, although sometimes it could be contentious. It was a lot of fun as well, just interacting with folks out there on the ground and talking to them about why they're out there. From 2008 until 2010, I was a sergeant with the Rapid Response Team. Then I moved over to the Mounted Patrol Unit for a couple of years, and we still did public order events. I was on Mounted Patrol during the Occupy Portland movement. That was quite the experience. And then when I went back to patrol in 2012, I rejoined the Rapid Response Team. I took over as the Rapid Response Team commander and was the Rapid Response Team commander through 2020 during that period of time. I also, along with Craig, took a lot of outside courses on the incident command system, including position-specific courses. And because of that, I also was able to start filling roles in the incident management team that kind of oversees the planning and coordination for these big events. So they gave me a different perspective and experience there. And along the way, just a lot of opportunities to travel around the country and internationally, learning about public order, as you said, like it's a science, but there's also an art to it. You know, Craig and I had the opportunity to go up to Ottawa, Canada, in 2018 for a conference where we got to meet experts from all over the world, including the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who were the hosts of the conference. We had academic folks who specialize in the science of crowd psychology and behavior. Got to meet some of them and start to really explore the science behind it. I had the opportunity to go over to Vienna, Austria for another conference in 2021, where again, got to meet experts from all over the world who deal with this public order events and managing those. And then most recently, we hosted a conference here in Portland. It really has been fascinating kind of as I've gotten more and more involved in public order and taken on that, going from kind of the tactical operational level to the management side of things and engage in those conversations with experts from all over the world. Again, that, really understanding there is a lot of science behind it, but at the same time, it's an incredibly challenging endeavor, and it's a lot of gray areas that leads to kind of what I say is there's also an art to it.
What surprises me the most is all of the planning and the coordination, and you're touching on the incident command system. And let's go back to that for just a minute, because if I'm at home and I'm on my computer or on my phone or look on TV and I see a protest and now police are involved, and there's so much more that happened before that moment of time that you're looking at. So the incident command system is a system that everyone uses, fire, police. Can you talk about that a little bit more? And then let's talk about the planning and the coordination piece.
Sure. The incident command system is federally mandated through presidential orders that came out after 9/11. He issued orders to develop a system for us to be able to have integrated responses so that fire and police and EMS and other first responders could interact with each other and have interoperability as part of it. We slowly took that on. While I was a sergeant, that was one of the things that we looked at is how do we better manage these events at the command and control side. And that's part of what the incident management system is about is developing command and control and ensuring that you have an easy line of who is in charge, what are your duties, what are your roles, so that everyone understands what they're out there doing, what the objectives are for the day, what are the priorities, what constraints there might be. And that's all part of that system. And there's a multitude of classes that you have to take in order to get to that point to be able to operate in that arena.
When you hear of a large-scale protest or something that's coming up that you think there might be some issues that police may need to address, where do you start with the objectives and planning for that?
So part of the process that we go through, first of all, is what intelligence do you have or what information do you have to be able to start making an assessment of the risk that you're facing. So that's the first step, is to evaluate what are the risks that you're looking at and how do those play in. And that could be anywhere from, are there other events happening? How many people are coming? Who's coming? What is the message that is out there? What's being posted on social media? Are there overt threats that are being posted as well? And so you start with that. And then you, as the incident commander, sit down and build out objectives and priorities for that event based on the information that you have regarding what the event is. From there, there's a process called the Planning P within ICS where it goes through a series of steps to ensure that everyone that's involved looks at it. And so after you develop those objectives, you sit down with your staff and share that with them to see if they have any issues or concerns. Once those are agreed upon, the person that then is considered your operations section chief, or the person that is going to be in charge of making and giving missions that day, sits down with those objectives and attaches resources to each of those objectives to ensure that you're properly resourced to be able to do all the things that the incident commander wants. From there, that person then sits down with the person who's planning and the person who's then in charge of getting the resources together so that they can then flesh out the full plan. Once that plan is in place and written and the resources have been dedicated to it, everyone sits down again for a final okay or approval of that plan. And then you move forward to then a briefing where then everybody that's involved on the ground level is then given information and the objectives and given their missions. And then they go forth. And it's a whole full-on process that can take several hours to many days to be able to get up to speed and prepared for an event.
Yeah, that's what I think is difficult to understand. What if it just happens? What if all of a sudden, you look out the window and people are starting to assemble and you see the confrontations or you see, illegal behavior happening?
So luckily those events don't happen very often, but when they do, within our policy, the process is we will dedicate someone who's considered the incident commander, the person in charge, and it's their role then, again, to go through that process, but very rapidly. They come up with, again, the objectives of what we want to accomplish that day, what are our priorities for that day, and then calls together as many people as possible to be able to then go and meet those missions and objectives, depending on what the situation is and depending on what's playing out, whether they need to go arrest people because of crime being committed or if we just need to monitor that event to make sure that it stays, legal and lawful.
And I know that we reach out to event organizers. Who wants to talk about the event liaison?
Like Craig said, when you first learn about an event, if it's an event that we think is going to rise to the level of requiring police resources, a planning process ahead of time, and assigning resources ahead of time, we'll frequently have our event liaison officers reach out to the event organizers if we can. And those event liaison officers are officers who have training and clear guidelines and established practices around trying to facilitate First Amendment events. So they receive some training on de-escalation, negotiation, facilitation, those kinds of high-level areas. They've got a supervisor who kind of makes sure that there's a standardized process. It's very transparent and open. We send them out to try and make contact with the event organizer to see what we can do to get more information about what their intent is, what their plans are for the event they're going to host, what their goals are, and if there's a way we can facilitate that and make sure that it's a peaceful, lawful event. Or if there is some area of conflict where, say, they want to, march in the street, and we know that the route they want to use to march in the street is going to impact light rail or mass transportation or emergency transportation routes, that kind of stuff, we can try and engage in a conversation to see if we can come up with a different place where they can march, where they still have the ability to engage in free speech, reach the audience they want, but maybe in a way that's less impactful to public safety. So that's the goal, and that's what the program is about. It's still a fairly new program based on the dialogue policing model that we had learned about over in Sweden and the UK use it. But really, it's become an international best practice. So we started the program. We based it out of our crisis negotiation team. That group of people who deals more with tactical events, again, has a lot of training around negotiation and communication, de-escalation principles. So it's a natural fit for us to kind of start with a group of people who are already trained and had some skills. Event liaison officers are kind of that first outreach and approach. Some events, based on that initial outreach, we might not even have a police response. It may be that they've assessed it. We've talked to them. There's no risks to public safety or the community. So we're aware of the event, but we don't police it at all.
Let's talk about the rapid response team. They're highly visible. And so therefore everybody immediately, I think, thinks that we start with them. And yet they're really not rolled out until illegal behavior is occurring. Let's start with a little bit about their history and how we use them.
So the rapid response team came into existence in 2001. It was back around the time when we had some pretty significant protest activity around the Bush presidencies and the war in Iraq, and some policing of protests that wasn't ideal, a lot of disorganization. So there was a conscious conversation here in the Bureau, a decision to create a team that specialized in a variety of things, but including public order policing. So it was originally born out of a concept of an all hazards response team. So a team that of people who have day jobs doing patrol, investigations, a variety of things. This is a secondary detached assignment. They receive additional training, and there's an administrative organizational structure that brings this team together when there's a need for a specialized resource like this. And it could be public order policing. It could be, post-disaster response to augment either the Fire Bureau's response around urban search and rescue, could be around enhanced communication skills. We have folks who have training in like ham radio operations, working with our neighborhood emergency teams who may be asked to fill volunteer roles post-disaster on how to communicate and coordinate with them. And, wildfire response, going out and doing evacuations, that sort of stuff. So a lot of different skill sets that team brings together, including public order policing, which is kind of their most frequent requests for that role when they're deployed. Now, within that, the rapid response team can deploy in a number of different profiles. They can deploy on bicycles, so they'd look a lot like a precinct bicycle team, or they can deploy in regular police uniforms, or they can deploy in enhanced protective equipment and the rapid response team uniforms, which is kind of what people picture most often when they think of the rapid response team as the black uniforms with the helmets and that extra equipment. They can deploy like that as well. If we end up with people engaged in significant criminal conduct, criminal mischief, assaultive behavior, or if we have intelligence leading us to believe that there's people that want to assault police officers or are going to engage in violence, if we have people try to intervene, then we may end up using rapid response team officers in that enhanced protective equipment profile.
Craig, in Portland, we often talk about a layered approach. What does that mean? And walk us through those steps.
Sure. When you have an event, you have normalcy. You're looking for what's acceptable for a group of people, whether it be a soccer match or a beer festival or a protest or a parade. And you're looking for what is that normalcy? What is the normal norms that are being there? And what you're looking for in that is friction points, or what we call tension points. And those would be individuals who are acting out or, causing trouble or accidentally. For example, in a parade, if someone drives into the parade because they miss a barricade, that would cause a friction point or a tension point. And those are things that we look at that we want to remove to de-escalate the situation, because usually those friction points cause escalation in tension and emotion. And we're trying to remove those to bring it back to normalcy. And so the layered approach that we have is originally what you'll see is we'll have event liaisons out there who will be contacting event organizers and other people just to be there to help them understand that we're not there to change what they're trying to do, but we're there to help facilitate that event. We're going to encourage them to self-monitor and use peer pressure so that they stay within the lines and set up their own boundaries so that they can stay peaceful and protest in a way that doesn't cause trouble. And if a tension point happens, we'll go to those event organizers and ask them if they can handle it, if they can use their influence to change the behavior of whatever's causing that friction point. If they can't, or they ask for our assistance, at that point, then you'll see us add another layer of bicycle officers who will then go and address that problem. Part of that is communicating, and so we want to use our sound truck and other abilities to communicate with the crowd to let them know that, hey, we're here because there's a friction point, and we want to remove that friction point and still let you do what you're doing. And so what we're trying to do is pluck out that one friction point out of the crowd. And so we'll be very clear at explaining to the crowd what we're doing and what we're focused on so that there's no surprises and that there's no excuses that people don't understand what we're doing and mistake it as, police action on the whole crowd. If that doesn't fix it and these individual friction points start to grow or fester, and now you're seeing larger groups of people causing trouble, we call that disorder. And at that point, then for sure we're bringing in more resources, again, with the goal of trying to de-escalate it and remove those problems and friction points so that we go back to normalcy. And so that looks like more officers on bicycle or more officers on foot, where then we might start directing parts of the crowd so that we can get in and remove those pieces. If it continues to escalate so that we have serious disorder, including or up to riot, that would be then when we bring in RRT and use those as a way to then try to calm the crowd and use techniques to either disperse the crowd or other techniques to try to get things back to normalcy by removing the problems that are causing the tension or the friction points. I mean, the ultimate goal in this is to allow people to exercise their freedoms and their rights to be able to do it without intervention of the police. But when we do have to intervene, the focus and the goal of that is to remove those problems or those friction points so that people can then continue on and continue to participate in their event without any interference or interactions with the police that are unnecessary.
Franz, you mentioned some of the conferences you and Craig have gone to and some of the things we've learned from other agencies around the world, in fact. Craig, can you tell me a little bit about some of the academics that you were talking about, but also, what we've learned, but what have people learned from the Portland Police Bureau?
There's always been a wall between policing and academics. Historically, here in the United States, we're always a little bit behind in understanding some of that, especially in public order policing. So right around, I want to say 2016, 2017, I came across an academic book by Tamriel Harold, a professor out of UNLV, who had written a book with some other authors that talked about crowd violence and how to prevent crowd violence. And that really opened the door to us. We then met with her in 2018, where we were able to have a good conversation about how does evidence-based policing methods play into public order. Her focus was on looking at how you mitigate criminal activity by some of the physical attributes that you put into setting up a venue for people to come to. So a lot of her academic research was about stadiums and how you mitigate criminal activity by setting up how they come in the gates and things like that. Through that work and in that book were other professors and other academics who had studied public order. That introduced us to Clifford Stott, who's out of the UK, who spent his lifetime working on the enhanced social identity model, where you start to learn how people interact with each other in groups and small groups so that you can better understand when you start seeing groups gather together that you've actually got small groups of individuals and it's not one big group or mob, as we would call it. And that helps you understand and break down the importance of some key qualities, such as differentiating between those that are criminal actors within the crowd and treating everyone the same so that you identify those criminal actors and are able to remove those people. Some of the key principles that he teaches about communication, differentiation, facilitation are embedded into now how we build our policy, so that communication is super important to communicate with the group, to understand the group, that they can understand you, so that there's no surprises, there's no misunderstandings, because it's all very clear. Education is another one of those, of the four pillars that he teaches, where we educate ourselves on the groups and what their motives are and what their purposes are and what they're trying to do, so that we can better facilitate it. At the same time, we're educating them on what our role is within this public order policing and how do we improve and enhance their ability to lawfully and legally go out and demonstrate. Again, I touched on the differentiation, where we differentiate between those bad actors and everyone else that's doing the right thing, and then facilitating and how do we help them meet their needs in a way that doesn't cause friction points amongst ourselves.
In your travels, what have you found? What do other cities do that we don't do?
When I hear that question, I think there's what American cities do, or cities in the United States, versus what cities in other parts of the world do. That's really, for me, the biggest contrast. I think when it comes to public order policing, the U.S. is generally behind the curve. We've traveled, to Europe, to Canada, and I would say a lot of those areas of the world, there's been a lot more academic research, and policing institutions have incorporated that research earlier than the U.S. has. And partly it's driven by a lot of the really seminal events they've had over there around soccer matches. There have been some pretty horrific disasters that have occurred at soccer matches, a lot of violence, interpersonal violence that drove the academic research that led to reforms in policing practices in Europe. Those types of things haven't necessarily happened here in the U.S. yet. So I would say the European cities, they're using a lot of the dialogue policing, or the event liaisons is what we call it here. Those practices are in place, but a lot of those European countries also have pretty robust systems of accountability, a much heavier footprint in terms of regulation around speech events. So, for example, in the UK, they've got an incredibly robust CCTV network, camera network there in the UK, where they can, they're watching and observing and monitoring protests, and if people engage in criminal behavior or violent behavior, they're able to hold those people accountable through that investigative process and follow-up process. So we don't really have that here because of the culture in the United States, and particularly here in Portland. that generally, leans away from surveillance technology and monitoring of First Amendment events. We have to manage it differently here. But again, in the U.S., there's a lot of places where they do use technology. They use camera technology, drone technology to monitor these protests and try to, as Craig said, differentiate and single out the people engaging in criminal behavior and remove them from that environment, which allows the rest of the First Amendment event to go on unimpeded. Here in Portland, we've had some challenges around that. Largely, it's been difficult to hold individuals accountable for criminal behavior because of the crowd dynamics and the lack of other technology solutions. We've ended up having to send police officers in to try and put hands on, and in some cases, resort to kind of that broad, crowd-based dispersals or crowd control munitions to address, what could have been potentially avoided at the lower level with removing an individual from the crowd. The event has kind of been allowed to go on until that criminal behavior has become more widespread and impactful to the point where we have to go in and disperse the crowd and disrupt that First Amendment event, which is never what we want to do. So I think we're getting better at finding those ways to differentiate and engage on that individual level, using some of those practices we've learned and we've seen from abroad. But that's what my takeaway is. I don't know if you want to add in anything, Craig.
The one thing is these are extremely complicated events. Whenever you get 50, 100 people, each one of those individuals has their own mind, thinks their own way, and every one of them can be thinking a different thing or doing a different thing, and you have to try to manage that and still allow public order to go as long as it's peaceful and lawful. And it's a lot more complex than I think people think, that it's just easy to go out and pluck somebody out of the crowd that's doing something, criminal. It's not that easy because you're dealing with that entire dynamic of people. And so how do you do that in a way that you can go in there and remove that person but not disturb the rest of the crowd or have that crowd take that action by the police as something illegitimate or something more than it actually is, of trying to remove a problem out of the crowd. And that's, I think, one of the areas that people just don't quite grasp, is how complex that decision-making is and how careful we have to be about doing that, constantly balancing, are our actions going to make the situation worse or going to make it better? And how do we judge that? And how do we go in there and do it in a way that allows people to continue exercising peacefully and lawfully and not disrupt that commotion? In any event, you at times will see people that try to co-opt the event, individual actors or small groups of people. And I think the challenge for us is using those event liaisons to keep folks informed of what we're seeing so that they're aware of that, and empowering the organizers of those events to be able to make decisions so that they can basically say, look, this group that's come in here that's not part of us, how do we self-police ourselves, or how do we marshal ourselves to ensure that group doesn't co-opt us or take away from our message? And that's always a challenge for us, is how do we do that diplomatically? How do we empower the group to care for themselves and allow their message not to get co-opted or some negative effect to happen within them?
So I want to leave our listeners with some tips if you're planning on going to an event, or if you're planning an event, some things to keep in mind.
I think it's like anything in public. When you're out in public and you're seeing things, I think it's important to be aware of what's going on. And if you start seeing things that don't sit right, if you start seeing criminal activity and don't want to be part of that, or are concerned about your personal safety, that's probably time for you then to move yourself to a place that you feel safe, where that you're not seeing that criminal activity.
And I would say if you're the one responsible for organizing the event or managing it, get a hold of the event liaison officer that has been trying to reach out to you, talk with you during this event, to see if the police can also help solve that. And if there is somebody engaging in criminal behavior in your event and it's disrupting it, we'd like to work with you to try and get that person removed from the event and allow your event to carry on lawfully, if it's possible.
Thank you both for being here today.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to The Talking Beat. Do you have a question for us? You can call and leave a message on our dedicated voicemail line at 971-339-5555. 8868. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends. More episodes can be found at our website, portlandoregon.gov/police/podcast.